The morning mist clung to Cedar Valley like a whispered secret, rolling down from the pine-covered mountains that surrounded the small Wyoming town. It was October 15th, 1952, and the air carried that sharp bite that promised winter wasn't far behind. The old railway station sat at the edge of town, its weathered wooden platform creaking under the weight of another ordinary day. But sometimes, ordinary days have a way of becoming extraordinary when you least expect it. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tom Harrison adjusted his leather gloves as he stepped out of his black Cadillac, the engine still ticking as it cooled. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something from nothing and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty doing it. His Sunset Creek ranch stretched across 15,000 acres of some of the finest grazing land in Wyoming, home to over 2,000 head of cattle and a reputation that reached clear to Denver. The townspeople of Cedar Valley respected him, though they'd never call him flashy. Tom Harrison was the kind of wealthy that whispered rather than shouted. He wasn't at the station for any grand reason that morning. His foreman, Henry Rodriguez, had mentioned that a shipment of specialized cattle feed was arriving on the 917 from Cheyenne, and Tom had offered to pick it up himself. It was the kind of task he could have easily delegated, but he'd always believed in staying connected to every aspect of his operation. Besides, the drive into town gave him time to think, and thinking was something Tom Harrison did better than most. The train was running late, which wasn't unusual for the mountain route. Tom checked his pocket watch and decided to wait inside. The small station house, where Margaret Coleman, the station master's wife, kept a pot of coffee brewing for travelers. The building smelled of old wood, coal dust, and the faint aroma of the apple pie Margaret had baked that morning. "Morning, Tom," Margaret called from behind the ticket counter, her gray hair pinned back in its usual neat bun. "Train's about 20 minutes behind. Storm up near Laramie slowed them down considerable." Tom nodded and poured himself a cup of coffee from the blue enamel pot. The station was quiet, except for the rhythmic ticking of the large wall clock and the distant sound of Margaret's husband, Carl, checking the freight manifest in the back room. Through the large windows, Tom could see the empty platform stretching toward the curve where the tracks disappeared into the forest. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the station's ambient noise. It was barely more than a whisper, but something about it made him pause with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The sound came again, and this time he was certain it was a child's voice, weak and frightened. Tom set down his cup and moved toward the window. At first, he saw nothing unusual. The platform remained empty, the morning mist still swirling around the wooden posts and benches. But then his eyes caught movement near the far end of the station, behind a stack of mail bags and freight containers. A flash of faded blue fabric, barely visible in the shadows. "Margaret," Tom called softly, not wanting to alarm anyone. "Did you see anyone come in this morning? Maybe with children?" Margaret looked up from her paperwork, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "No, Tom. Been quiet as a church mouse since Carl opened up at 6. Why?" Tom didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the door and stepped out onto the platform. The October air hit his face with renewed sharpness, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of snow. He moved slowly along the platform, his boots echoing hollowly on the wooden planks. As he approached the stack of freight, the sound came again. This time it was unmistakable. A child was crying, the kind of tired, hopeless crying that comes after all the loud sobs have been exhausted. Tom's heart clenched as he recognized the sound. He'd heard it before, during the war, in places where children had lost everything. He rounded the corner of the freight pile and stopped. What he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. A young woman sat hunched against the station wall, her arms wrapped protectively around two small children. Her dark hair hung in limp strands around a face that spoke of exhaustion deeper than sleep could cure. Her coat, once probably a cheerful blue, was now faded and torn at the shoulder. The children pressed against her were thin, their faces pale with that particular pallor that comes from too many missed meals. For a moment Tom stood frozen. The woman looked up at him with eyes that held a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She couldn't have been more than 25, but hardship had aged her beyond her years. The children, twin boys who looked to be about 7 years old, peered at him with wide, solemn eyes that seemed far too old for their young faces. "Ma'am," Tom said gently, removing his hat, "are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman's first instinct was to shrink back, pulling her children closer. But then, something in Tom's voice, perhaps the genuine concern, made her pause. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes filled with tears that she seemed too tired to shed. One of the boys, braver than his brother, spoke up in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mister, do you have any food? Mama hasn't eaten in 2 days, and we're awful hungry." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. He crouched down to bring himself to eye level with the family, his hands resting gently on his knees. "When's the last time any of you had a proper meal?" The woman finally found her voice, though it cracked with exhaustion. We 3 days ago. In Denver. I had enough for the train tickets, but—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing with shame. Tom's mind raced. Denver was over 200 miles south. The train journey alone would have taken the better part of a day, and if they'd been without food for 3 days, that meant they'd been traveling with empty stomachs for most of the trip. "What's your name?" Tom asked the woman, his voice gentle but purposeful. "Rachel Martinez," she whispered. "These are my boys, Lucy and Sam." She gestured to each twin as she spoke their names. "Well, Rachel Martinez," Tom said, standing up and extending his hand. "I'm Tom Harrison, and I think the first thing we need to do is get some food in all of you. Can you walk?" Rachel looked at his outstretched hand, as if it might disappear if she reached for it. Yes, I think so. But mister, I don't have any money. I can't pay you back." "Nobody asked you to," Tom replied, his hand still extended. "Now let's get you and these boys somewhere warm where we can figure out what's what." The simple kindness in his voice seemed to break something loose in Rachel. Tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks as she took his hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. The boys flanked her, each taking one of her hands as they walked slowly toward the station house. Margaret Coleman took one look at the family and immediately sprang into action. Without asking questions, she bustled around the small kitchen area behind the ticket counter, pulling out leftover biscuits, cold bacon, and a jar of honey she kept for emergencies. "Sit, sit," she urged, guiding Rachel and the twins to the worn wooden bench near the stove. "Carl, put more wood on that fire. These children are chilled to the bone." "Dit." Tom watched as Margaret worked with the efficient compassion of a woman who had raised 5 children of her own. She warmed milk in a small saucepan and sliced thick pieces of bread, slathering them with butter and honey. The twins' eyes grew wide at the sight of food, but they waited politely until their mother nodded permission before taking their first tentative bites. What happened next would become part of Cedar Valley folklore. The boys didn't gulp or grab. Instead, they ate, with careful, measured bites, savoring each morsel as if it might be their last. Their mother took even smaller portions, clearly trying to leave as much as possible for her children. "Ma'am," Tom said quietly, settling into a chair across from them. "Those boys need to see their mama eat too. Children worry when their parents don't take care of themselves." Rachel looked up at him, and for the first time he saw a spark of something other than desperation in her eyes. It might have been gratitude, or perhaps just the faintest hint of hope. She took a larger bite of biscuit and managed what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Where were you headed?" Tom asked, careful to keep his tone conversational rather than interrogative. "Nowhere in particular," Rachel admitted. We needed to get away from Denver. I thought maybe in a smaller town I could find work, somewhere to start over." "What kind of work do you do?" Rachel's cheeks colored slightly. "I was a secretary before the boys were born, but I can clean, cook, mend clothes. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Harrison. I just need a chance." Tom nodded thoughtfully. Through the window, he could see the approaching smoke of the delayed train, still several miles out, but growing closer. His cattle feed would arrive soon, and with it, a decision point. He could give this family a meal, maybe a few dollars, and send them on their way. It would be the reasonable thing to do, the safe thing. But Tom Harrison hadn't built his ranch by always taking the safe path. "Tell me about Denver," he said. "What brought you to the train station with nothing but the clothes on your backs?" Rachel's hands tightened around her cup of warm milk. For a moment, Tom thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. "My husband died 8 months ago. Construction accident. There was some insurance, but not much, and the medical bills. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." She took a shaky breath. "I tried to keep our apartment, tried to find work, but with the boys so young, it was hard to keep any job. The landlord was patient for a while, but last week he said we had to go." Sam, the slightly smaller of the twins, looked up at Tom with serious dark eyes. "Mama sold all our furniture and her wedding ring. She said we were going on an adventure, but I think she was just sad." Rachel's face crumpled slightly at her son's innocent honesty. "I told them we were going to find a new place to live, somewhere better, but the truth is, Mr. Harrison, I didn't have a plan. I just bought tickets for the furthest place our money would take us and hoped." "Hope for what?" Tom asked. Gently. "Hope for exactly this, I guess. For someone kind enough to see that we needed help." The train whistle echoed across the valley, then long and mournful, announcing its approach to Cedar Valley station. In a few minutes, the platform would bustle with activity as passengers disembarked and freight was unloaded. The quiet intimacy of this moment would be broken, and Tom would have to make his choice. He looked at Rachel Martinez, this young mother who had risked everything on hope alone. He looked at Lucy and Sam, 7-year-old boys who had learned to be grateful for a piece of bread with honey. He thought about his ranch, his comfortable life, his carefully ordered existence. And then he thought about something his own father had told him years ago, back when Tom was young and struggling to build his first herd. "Son," the old man had said, "you can't take it with you, and you can't spend it if you're too dead inside to know what's worth buying." Tom Harrison had been wealthy for over a decade, but he'd never spent his money on anything that really mattered. Until now. "Rachel," he said, his decision crystallizing as he spoke, "how would you and the boys like to come out to my ranch for a while, just until you get your feet under you? I've got more space than I know what to do with, and my housekeeper Maggie has been after me to find someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. The pay wouldn't be much to start, but there'd be a roof over your heads, 3 meals a day, and maybe a chance for those boys to go to our local school." Rachel stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Mr. Harrison, you don't know anything about us. We could be. I mean, how do you know we're not? Dangerous criminals?" Tom asked with a slight smile. "Well, if you are, you're the politest ones I've ever met. Besides, anyone who teaches their children to say please and thank you when they're half-starved can't be all bad. The train was closer now, its rhythmic chugging growing louder. Steam rose from its stack, mingling with the morning mist that still clung to the mountains. "But why?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible over the approaching engine. "Why? Would you help strangers?" Tom considered the question for a moment, watching Lucy and Sam finish the last of their bread and honey. "Because someone helped me once, when I needed it most. And because those boys deserve better than wondering where their next meal is coming from." He paused, then added more quietly, "And maybe because I've got everything a man could want, except someone to share it with. My ranch is a lonely place, Rachel. Perhaps it's time that changed." The train rounded the final curve then, its whistle splitting the morning air as it approached the platform. Margaret bustled about, preparing for the controlled chaos of arrival. Carl emerged from the back room with his clipboard, ready to supervise the unloading of freight. But in the quiet corner where Tom sat with Rachel and her twins, time seemed suspended. Rachel's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for the catch that surely had to exist. Tom waited patiently, understanding that trust, real trust, couldn't be rushed. Finally, Sam spoke up. "Mama, does the man have horses on his ranch?" Tom chuckled. "More horses than you could count, son. And cattle, and a creek that runs right through the middle of the property where the fishing is pretty good, if you know where to look." Lucy's eyes lit up for the first time since Tom had found them. "Could we really stay there, Mama? Could we really?" Rachel looked at her sons, at their hopeful faces and too thin bodies, and then back at Tom. In her eyes, he saw the exact moment when desperation transformed into something that might, eventually, become hope. "If you're serious, Mr. Harrison," she said slowly, "if you really mean it, then yes, we'd be grateful for the chance." Tom smiled then, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his weathered face. "I'm as serious as snow in January, Rachel Martinez. Welcome to Cedar Valley." The train pulled into the station with a great hissing of steam and squealing of brakes. Passengers began to disembark, and workers started unloading freight. The quiet morning had become a bustling hub of activity. But for Tom Harrison, the most important cargo had already been delivered. As he helped Rachel and her twins gather their few belongings, a single worn suitcase and a paper bag that held what remained of their possessions, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Standing on that platform with steam from the train swirling around them, Tom Harrison couldn't have known that this moment would become the stuff of legend in Cedar Valley. He couldn't have predicted that the decision he'd just made would transform not only the lives of Rachel Martinez and her twin boys, but his own life in ways he never could have imagined. All he knew was that for the first time in years, his wealth felt like it had found its true purpose. As he guided his unexpected passengers toward his Cadillac, he caught Margaret Coleman watching from the station window. She gave him a nod of approval that told him everything he needed to know about the rightness of his choice. The drive to Sunset Creek Ranch would take 20 minutes. In that short span of time, 4 lives would begin to interweave in ways that would create ripples throughout the entire community. Rachel Martinez, who had boarded a train with nothing but hope and determination, was about to discover that sometimes the end of one story is really just the beginning of something far more beautiful. Tom opened the passenger door of his Cadillac and helped Rachel settle the twins in the back seat. As he walked around to the driver's side, he glanced back at the train station where this unexpected chapter had begun. The morning mist was finally beginning to lift, revealing the full majesty of the mountains that surrounded Cedar Valley. It was going to be a beautiful day, Tom thought. The kind of day when anything seemed possible. He had no idea how right he was. The Cadillac's engine purred smoothly as they wound through the mountain roads leading away from Cedar Valley. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, stealing glances at the man who had just changed their lives with a simple offer of kindness. Tom Harrison drove with easy confidence, occasionally pointing out landmarks. To the twins who pressed their faces against the back windows, marveling at scenery they'd never imagined. "See that ridge up there?" Tom said, nodding toward a line of pine-covered hills. "That's where the elk come down in winter. Sometimes you can spot them early in the morning, just standing there like they own the whole valley." Sam's eyes widened. "Real elk, like in the picture books?" "Bigger than the picture books," Tom replied with a chuckle. "Wait until you see a bull elk with a full rack of antlers. Makes a man feel pretty small in comparison." Rachel watched her sons' faces transform as they absorbed this new world of possibilities. For months, their universe had shrunk to the confines of their cramped Denver apartment, then to the uncertainty of train stations and empty stomachs. Now, suddenly, there were elk and mountains, and a man talking about creeks and fishing holes as if such wonders were simply part of everyday life. "Mr. Harrison," Rachel began hesitantly, then stopped. "Tom," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be sharing the same roof, formal titles seem a bit unnecessary." "Tom," she repeated, testing the name. "I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for charity. Whatever work you have, whatever you need done, I'll earn our keep. I won't have you or anyone else thinking I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Tom glanced at her, noting the firm set of her jaw, the pride that straightened her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "Rachel, I've got a housekeeper named Maggie Collins who's been with me for 8 years. She's getting on in years, and the house is bigger than one person should have to manage alone. If you're half as capable as you seem, you'll be earning every penny I pay you." He paused, navigating a sharp curve in the road. "Besides, those boys of yours look like they could use some fattening up, and Maggie's been complaining for years that she cooks too much for just 2 people. You'd actually be doing us a favor." Lucy piped up from the back seat. "Mama, what's fattening up mean?" Rachel's cheeks colored slightly. "It means eating good, healthy food so you can grow big and strong, like vegetables." Sam asked with the skeptical tone of a 7-year-old who had learned to be suspicious of anything green on his plate. "Vegetables, meat, fresh bread, milk from our own cows," Tom said. "Maggie makes the best apple pie in 3 counties, and she's been known to sneak cookies to deserving boys who help with small chores around the ranch." The twins exchanged glances that spoke volumes. In their young lives, cookies had become mythical treats, things other children had, but they could only dream about. They crested a hill, and suddenly the valley opened before them like a picture from a fairy tale. Sunset Creek Ranch stretched across the landscape in a patchwork of green pastures, split-rail fences, and clusters of cattle dotting the grassland like scattered brown and black stones. The main house sat on a gentle rise, a sprawling 2-story structure of log and stone that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape itself. "Oh my," Rachel breathed, pressing one hand to her chest. The house was nothing like the grand mansions Rachel had imagined when she'd heard Tom described as a millionaire. Instead, it was warm and welcoming, with a wide front porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building and windows that caught the afternoon sunlight like friendly eyes. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and flower boxes under the windows still held the last brave blooms of the season. "It's beautiful," Rachel said softly. "It's home," Tom replied simply. "Has been for 15 years now. Built most of it myself, with help from the men in town. Figure a man ought to know every nail and board in the place he calls his own." As they approached the main house, a border collie came bounding across the yard, tail wagging with the enthusiasm only dogs possess. Behind the dog, an older woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. Even From a distance, Rachel could see the curiosity in the woman's posture as she took in the unexpected passengers in Tom's car. "That's Maggie," Tom explained, "and the dog is Scout. He's got more personality than sense, but he's good with children." Tom parked the Cadillac in front of the house and came around to help Rachel and the twins out. Scout immediately zeroed in on the boys, his tail creating a wind of its own as he sniffed and circled them with careful canine assessment. "Tom Harrison," Maggie called from the porch, her hands now planted firmly on her hips. "You'd better have a good explanation for bringing home company without so much as a word of warning. I've only got beef stew for supper, and there's barely enough for 2, let alone 5. "Maggie Collins," Tom replied, with the easy familiarity of old friendship. "Meet Rachel Martinez and her boys, Lucy and Sam. They're going to be staying with us for a while. Rachel's going to help you with the house, and the boys are going to help us remember what it's like to have children's laughter in these old rooms." Maggie's stern expression melted the moment she got a good look at the family. Her experienced eyes took in Rachel's worn clothing, the boys' too thin faces, and the single battered suitcase that held all their worldly possessions. Without missing a beat, she clapped her hands together. "Well then, we'd better get you settled. Boys, you look like you could use some of my fresh milk and maybe a slice of bread with jam while your mama and I figure out sleeping arrangements. And don't worry about supper. I've never met a pot of stew that couldn't stretch to feed whoever needed feeding." As they climbed the front steps, Rachel felt overwhelmed by the warmth radiating from both the house and its inhabitants. The porch was furnished with comfortable chairs and a wooden swing that swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Carved railings showed the work of skilled hands, and everything spoke of care and permanence. Inside, the house was even more welcoming. The front door opened into a spacious living room with a stone fireplace large enough to heat the entire space. Comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings, braided rugs on polished wooden floors, and shelves lined with well-read books created an atmosphere of lived-in comfort rather than formal display. "Mama," Lucy whispered, tugging on Rachel's skirt, "is this really where we're going to live?" Before Rachel could answer, Maggie had scooped both boys toward the kitchen. "Come along, young ones. Let's get some food in you while the adults sort things out. Tom, you bring Rachel's things to the blue room upstairs. The boys can share the small room next to it. There are twin beds in there that haven't been used in years." The kitchen was the heart of the house, warm and fragrant with the smell of baking bread and simmering stew. A large wooden table dominated the center, scarred from years of use, but polished to a warm glow. Copper pots hung from hooks, and windows on 2 sides let in natural light that made everything seem to sparkle. Maggie settled the twins at the table and poured large glasses of milk from a blue ceramic pitcher. The bread she sliced was still warm from the oven, and she spread it thick with butter and strawberry jam. Rachel watched her sons take their first tentative bites, then saw their eyes widen with delight. "This is the best bread ever," Sam declared, jam already decorating his chin. "Made it this morning," Maggie said with obvious pleasure. "We've got our own chickens for eggs, milk cows for fresh cream, and I keep a vegetable garden that could feed half the county. Nothing like fresh ingredients to make everything taste better." Tom appeared in the kitchen doorway, having deposited Rachel's suitcase upstairs. "Maggie, why don't you show Rachel around while I check on the evening chores? Boys, when you're finished with your snack, would you like to come see the horses?" The transformation in Lucy and Sam was immediate. They straightened in their chairs, milk mustaches forgotten in their excitement. "Real horses?" Lucy asked. "Can we pet them?" Sam added. "If you're gentle and listen to instructions, I don't see why not," Tom replied. "A ranch isn't much of a ranch without boys who know their way around horses." After Tom left to tend to his duties, Maggie led Rachel through the house. The tour revealed room after room of comfortable, well-maintained spaces. The blue bedroom, that would be Rachel's, was larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with the boys in Denver. It had windows on 2 walls, a comfortable bed with a handmade quilt, a writing desk, and a wardrobe that could hold more clothes than Rachel had owned in years. "Tom built this house with a family in mind," Maggie explained as they stood in the doorway. "Never found the right woman to fill it with, though Lord knows half the unmarried ladies in 3 counties have tried to catch his attention. He's a good man, Rachel, one of the finest I've ever known." The boys' room was equally charming, with matching twin beds, a shared dresser, and windows that looked out over the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Someone had taken the time to hang cheerful curtains and place a few children's books on a small shelf. "Those books belonged to Tom when he was a boy," Maggie said, noticing Rachel's glance. "His mother saved them all these years. She always hoped they'd be useful again someday." As they made their way back downstairs, Maggie explained the household routines. Breakfast was at 6:30, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. Laundry was done on Mondays, baking on Tuesdays and Fridays. The house had electricity and indoor plumbing, luxuries Rachel had never taken for granted, but had been forced to live without in recent months. "What exactly would you need me to do?" Rachel asked as they returned to the kitchen. "Cooking, cleaning, laundry, tending the vegetable garden," Maggie replied. "Nothing you couldn't learn if you don't already know it. The house is big, but it's not complicated. Tom's not a demanding man. He just likes things clean and comfortable." Through the kitchen window they could see Tom in the distance, leading the twins toward a large red barn. Scout bounded along beside them, clearly, having appointed himself as the boys' official guardian and guide. "He lost his own family young," Maggie said quietly, following Rachel's gaze. "Parents died in a winter storm when he was barely 20. Had to build everything from nothing, with no one but himself to rely on. Maybe that's why he understands what it's like to need help." Rachel felt a pang of recognition. She knew something about building from nothing, about facing the world alone with more responsibility than seemed possible to bear. "Maggie," she said carefully, "I need you to know that I'm not looking for anything more than honest work and a safe place for my boys. I'm not trying to take advantage of Mr. Harrison's kindness or hoping for something that isn't being offered." Maggie studied her with shrewd eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize truth when they heard it. "Child, I've watched Tom Harrison for 8 years. He's never brought anyone home before, not even for dinner. Whatever his reasons for helping you, they're his own business. Your job is to take care of those boys and earn your keep. Everything else will sort itself out in its own time." Outside, they could hear the sound of boyish laughter mixed with Tom's deeper chuckle. Rachel moved to the window and saw her sons standing beside a gentle-looking brown mare, their faces bright with wonder as Tom showed them how to offer apple slices on their flattened palms. "When's the last time you heard them laugh like that?" Maggie asked softly. Rachel's throat tightened. "Months before their father died, before everything fell apart. I'd forgotten they were still capable of that kind of joy." "Children are resilient," Maggie said. "Give them food, safety, and love, and they'll bloom like flowers after a good rain. The question is, what about their mama? When's the last time you allowed yourself a moment of happiness?" The question caught Rachel off guard. Happiness had become such a foreign concept that she'd stopped thinking about it entirely. Her world had narrowed to survival, to making it through each day, and keeping her sons safe and fed. The idea that she might deserve moments of contentment seemed almost selfish. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I stopped thinking about my own happiness when I became responsible for theirs." "That's a mistake a lot of mothers make," Maggie said gently. "Children need to see their parents taking care of themselves too. How else will they learn that they're worth taking care of?" Before Rachel could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Lucy and Sam tumbled inside, their faces flushed with excitement and fresh air. "Mama, Mama!" Sam exclaimed. "Mr. Tom let us feed apples to Buttercup, and she has the softest nose, and there's a baby calf named Freckles who follows you around like a puppy. And there are chickens that lay eggs every single day," Lucy added, "and a pig named Gertrude, who's smarter than most people, and Mr. Tom says if we're good helpers, he'll teach us to ride horses." Tom appeared in the doorway behind them, brushing hay from his shirt. "I hope I didn't overstep," he said to Rachel, but they seemed interested in learning about ranch life. "They've never seen animals like this before," Rachel said. "In Denver, we were lucky if we saw a stray dog now and then. This must seem like another world to them." "It's a good world for boys to grow up in," Tom replied. "Plenty of space to run, fresh air to breathe, and enough work to teach them the value of responsibility. Speaking of which, how would you boys like to help me with the evening feeding? The animals depend on us to take care of them every single day, rain or shine." The twins looked to their mother for permission, their eyes bright with anticipation. Rachel nodded, and they raced back outside, chattering excitedly about their new responsibilities. "They'll sleep well tonight," Maggie observed with satisfaction. "Nothing like honest work and fresh air to tucker out energetic boys." As evening approached, the house filled with the comfortable bustle of preparation. Maggie and Rachel worked together to set the table and finish preparing supper, while Tom and the boys completed the last of the daily chores. The easy cooperation felt natural, as if they'd been sharing these rhythms for years rather than hours. Supper was a revelation for Rachel and her sons. The beef stew was rich and hearty, full of tender meat and vegetables from Maggie's garden. Fresh bread, still warm from its second baking of the day, came with real butter churned that morning. The boys ate with the focused intensity of children making up for lost time, while the adults talked easily about ranch operations and the upcoming winter preparations. "We'll need to get the boys enrolled in school," Tom mentioned, as Maggie served generous portions of apple pie. "Cedar Valley has a good school, and the teacher, Miss Patterson, is particularly skilled with children who've had their education interrupted." Rachel felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. "The boys haven't been to school since April. I kept them home the last month we were in Denver because I couldn't afford proper clothes for them, and children can be cruel about such things." "Children here aren't much concerned with fancy clothes," Tom assured her. "Most of them are ranch kids or farm kids. They understand that good clothes are for special occasions, and work clothes are for every day. Lucy and Sam will fit right in." After supper, the family gathered in the living room. Tom built up the fire while Maggie settled into her favorite chair with a basket of mending. The twins sprawled on the rug in front of the fireplace, Scout stretched out between them like a furry bridge. "Mr. Tom," Lucy said sleepily, "is this really going to be our home now?" Tom exchanged a glance with Rachel before answering. "For as long as your mama wants it to be, son. This house has been too quiet for too long. It needs the sound of children's voices to make it feel complete." Sam rolled over to look at his mother. "Mama, can we stay forever?" Rachel's heart clenched at the hope in her son's voice. "We'll see, sweetheart. For now, we're grateful to be here, and we're going to work hard to be helpful and earn our place." But even as she spoke the careful words, Rachel felt something shifting inside her chest. For the first time in months, she could imagine a future that extended beyond mere survival. Sitting in this warm room, watching her sons' faces glow in the firelight, she allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to truly belong somewhere again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding everyone that winter was approaching. But inside Sunset Creek Ranch, 4 people who had been strangers that morning were beginning the delicate process of becoming something more. Not a family yet, perhaps, but no longer strangers either. As Rachel tucked her sons into their new beds that night, Sam reached up to touch her face with one small hand. "Mama, you look different tonight." "Different how, sweetheart?" "Less scared," he said simply. "More like you used to look before Daddy went to heaven." Rachel kissed his forehead, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. "Get some sleep, baby. Tomorrow we start learning how to be ranch hands." As she made her way to her own room, Rachel caught sight of herself in the hall mirror. Sam was right. The face looking back at her still showed the wear of recent hardships. But there was something new there too. Something that might, eventually, become hope. The first week at Sunset Creek Ranch passed in a blur of new routines and small discoveries. Rachel threw herself into her work with the determination of someone who understood that security came through proving her worth. She rose before dawn each morning, helping Maggie prepare breakfast for the ranch hands who would soon arrive for the day's work. Her hands, soft from months of unemployment, quickly developed calluses from scrubbing floors, beating rugs, and tending the vast vegetable garden that supplied much of the household's food. Lucy and Sam adapted to ranch life with the remarkable flexibility of children. They learned to gather eggs from the henhouse without disturbing the brooding hens, to scatter corn for the chickens, and to carry water buckets that were almost too heavy for their small frames. Tom watched them carefully during these first days, noting their eagerness to please and their genuine wonder at the animals that surrounded them. But it was during the second week that the first real test came. Rachel was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard shouting from the direction of the main barn. The voices were angry, male, and carried the particular edge that meant trouble. She dropped the wet shirt she'd been pinning and hurried toward the sound, her heart hammering with the familiar anxiety of someone who had learned to expect the worst. She found Tom facing 3 men she didn't recognize, their horses lathered, with sweat as if they'd ridden hard. The apparent leader was a tall, thin man with pale eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jawline. His companions flanked him, their hands resting casually but meaningfully on their gun belts. "I'm telling you, Harrison," the scarred man was saying, his voice carrying the flat menace of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Rodriguez stole that money from my ranch. $27 from my foreman's lockbox. I've got witnesses." Tom stood with his arms crossed, his posture relaxed but ready. "And I'm telling you, Wade, that Henry Rodriguez has worked for me for 3 years, without so much as a penny going missing. If someone took your money, you'd better look closer. To home." Murkurdl. Wade Thornton owned the Circle T Ranch, 15 miles south of Cedar Valley, and his reputation preceded him like a bad smell. He was known for working his men hard, paying them little, and solving problems with violence when persuasion failed. That he would ride onto Tom's land with armed men spoke to either desperation or stupidity. $27 doesn't just walk away, Wade sneered. "Rodriguez was in town yesterday, and this morning my money's gone. Seems pretty clear to me." Henry Rodriguez emerged from the barn, his dark face calm, but his eyes alert to the danger these men represented. "Mr. Wade, I never took nothing from you. I bought supplies at Coleman's store, had a beer at Sullivan's, and came straight home. Ask anyone who saw me." "The word of a Mexican thief doesn't mean much around here," Wade replied, and Rachel saw Tom's jaw tighten at the slur. "Watch your mouth, Thornton," Tom said quietly, but his voice carried the kind of authority that made smart men reconsider their words. "Henry Rodriguez is worth 10 of you on your best day." Wade's pale eyes flicked toward the house, and Rachel realized with a chill that he'd noticed her standing there. His gaze traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, taking in her work dress, her bare arms, her unbound hair. Well, Wade said, his tone shifting to something even more unpleasant. "Harrison's got himself a new woman. Pretty little thing. Where'd you find her, Tom? One of those catalog brides I've been hearing about?" The insult hit its mark. Rachel felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but before she could respond, Tom stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "That's enough," Tom said, his voice deadly quiet. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land before I throw you off." Wade laughed, but there was nervous energy behind it. Tom Harrison might be outnumbered, but his reputation as a man who could handle himself was well established in the valley. All right, Wade said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "But this isn't over, Harrison. Rodriguez stole from me, and I aim to get satisfaction one way or another." He swung back, onto his horse, his companions following suit. But before wheeling away, he looked directly at Rachel again. "Ma'am," he said with exaggerated politeness, "if you ever get tired of playing house with the high and mighty Tom Harrison, the Circle T always has room for a woman who knows her place." The threat hung in the air, like smoke, as the three men rode away. Rachel found she was shaking, not with fear, but with rage at the casual cruelty in Wade's words. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," Tom said, moving to stand beside her. "Wade Thornton is poison, and he makes everything he touches dirty." "Is it true?" Rachel asked, her voice barely controlled. "Do people think that we're—" "Does it matter what people think?" Tom replied. "You know who you are, and I know who you are. That's what counts." But Rachel could see in his eyes that it did matter, not because he cared about gossip, but because he cared about her reputation and her comfort in the community they both had to live in. Henry Rodriguez approached them, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Tom, I'm sorry this trouble came to your door. Maybe you should get back to work," Tom interrupted firmly. "Wade Thornton's accusations don't carry any weight here. We all know what kind of man you are, Henry." That evening, after the boys were in bed, Tom and Rachel sat on the front porch while Maggie finished her evening chores. The air was crisp with the promise of the first frost, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I need to ask you something," Rachel said, her voice careful, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Tom rocked gently in his chair, waiting. "Are you helping us because you feel sorry for us, or because—" She stopped, unable to finish the question. "Because what?" Tom prompted gently. "Because you're hoping for something more than just a housekeeper and cook?" The question hung between them like a bridge that could either be crossed or burned. Tom was quiet for so long that Rachel began to regret asking. "Rachel," he said, "finally, when I found you and the boys at that train station, I wasn't thinking about anything except getting food into 3 hungry people. When I offered you work here, I was thinking about giving you a chance to get back on your feet with dignity intact." He paused, then continued more quietly. "But if I'm being completely honest, I'd be lying if I said I haven't noticed that. This house feels more like a home with you and the boys in it. I'd be lying if I said I don't enjoy hearing children's laughter in these rooms, or watching you work in Maggie's garden, or seeing how you've brought life to spaces that have been empty too long." Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. "Tom, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm not expecting anything. You came here as someone who needed help, and you'll leave as someone who earned her way. Whatever happens between now and then is up to you." The honesty in his voice, the careful way he respected her autonomy while acknowledging his own feelings, touched something deep in Rachel's chest. She'd grown accustomed to men who took what they wanted without asking, who saw women as possessions to be acquired rather than people to be respected. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being honest and for not pressing." "Take all the time you need," Tom replied. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days later, the issue of Wade Thornton's accusations was resolved in a way that surprised everyone. Carol Davis, who ran the general store in town, discovered $27 tucked behind some canned goods on her shelves. When confronted, her nephew Jimmy, who helped with inventory, broke down and confessed to stealing the money from Wade's ranch and hiding it in the store until he could figure out how to spend it without getting caught. The news spread through Cedar Valley like wildfire, and Henry Rodriguez's reputation was not only cleared but enhanced by the graceful way he accepted Wade Thornton's grudging apology. "That boy's got more integrity in his little finger than Wade Thornton has in his whole body," Maggie declared with satisfaction as she kneaded bread dough with perhaps more vigor than strictly necessary. But the incident had planted seeds of concern in the community about Rachel's situation at the ranch. Well-meaning neighbors began dropping by with increasing frequency, ostensibly to welcome Rachel to the valley, but actually to assess the propriety of the arrangement. Mrs. Prudence Whitmore, the pastor's wife and self-appointed guardian of community morals, arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a basket of preserves and a head full of questions disguised as small talk. "Such a lovely arrangement you have here, dear," she said to Rachel as they sat in the front parlor, "though I imagine it must be challenging, being a single woman in a household with an unmarried man. People do talk, you know." Rachel felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her voice level. "Mr. Harrison has been nothing but respectful and generous. Maggie Collins serves as chaperone, and my boys are with me at all times. I can't imagine what there would be to talk about." "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Whitmore said with the kind of smile that was meant to look sympathetic but felt condescending, "you're clearly a woman of virtue, but appearances matter in a small community. People begin to wonder about a woman living in a man's house, no matter how innocent the arrangement. Then perhaps people should find more productive ways to occupy their time," Rachel replied, her patience wearing thin. Mrs. Whitmore's smile became more strained. "I'm simply suggesting that you might want to consider your sons' futures. How will it look for them, growing up under circumstances that some might find questionable?" The implied threat to her children's reputation hit Rachel like a physical blow. She'd worked so hard to give Lucy and Sam stability and safety, and now their very security was being used against them. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rachel said carefully, "I appreciate your concern, but my sons are happy, healthy, and well cared for. They're learning valuable skills and receiving an education. I fail to see how that could be construed as harmful to their futures." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Whitmore replied, gathering her things. "I simply thought you should be aware of how things might appear to others. A woman in your position can't be too careful about her reputation." After she left, Rachel sat alone in the parlor, her hands trembling with anger and hurt. She'd known this day would come, when the whispers would start and the questions would be raised. In a small community, even innocent situations could be twisted into scandals by people with too much time and too little charity in their hearts. Tom found her there an hour later, staring out the window at the pastures where her sons played with Scout under Maggie's watchful eye. "Prudence Whitmore paid you a visit," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Word travels fast. In Cedar Valley, word travels faster than wildfire and spreads twice as far." Tom's voice was gentle but serious. "What did she say?" Rachel told him about the conversation, watching his face grow progressively darker as she repeated Mrs. Whitmore's veiled threats and implications. "That sanctimonious old biddy," Tom muttered when she finished. "She's been stirring up trouble in this town for 20 years, always in the name of protecting everyone's virtue." "But she's not wrong about appearances," Rachel said quietly. "People are talking, and that talk will eventually affect Lucy and Sam. I won't have my children suffer because of gossip about their mother's living situation." Tom leaned forward in his chair. "Rachel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe it's time we started looking for other arrangements. Maybe there's a boarding house in town or—" "No." Tom's voice was firm. "This is your home now. You and the boys belong here. I'll be damned if I let Prudence Whitmore and her circle of gossips drive you away. It's not that simple, Tom. In a place like this, reputation is everything. If the community decides I'm a fallen woman, my sons will pay the price. They'll be ostracized, called names, made to feel ashamed of something they don't even understand. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. When he spoke, his voice was careful and measured. There is one way to stop the talk permanently. Rachel looked at him, already knowing what he was going to say, but needing to hear it anyway. "We could get married," Tom said simply. "Not for love, not for romance, but for practical reasons, to protect your reputation and give the boys my name. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more than what we have now, but with legal protections for you and them." The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them had been ready to discuss. Rachel stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine desire to protect her and her children from the cruelty of small-town judgment. "Tom, I can't ask you to sacrifice your future for us. What if you meet someone you truly love? What if you want children of your own?" "I'm 42 years old, Rachel. If I was going to find that kind of love, I probably would have found it by now. And as for children..." He glanced toward the window, where Lucy and Sam were teaching Scout to sit for treats. "Those boys are already more like sons to me than I ever expected to have." Rachel felt tears threaten. The kindness in his offer, the matter-of-fact way he was willing to tie his life to theirs for no other reason than to protect them, overwhelmed her. "You don't have to answer now," Tom said, seeing her distress. "Think about it. Talk to Maggie if you want another perspective, but know that the offer stands, and it comes with no expectations beyond what we already have." That night, after the boys were asleep, Rachel found Maggie in the kitchen, polishing silverware by lamplight. "Maggie, can I ask you something?" "Of course, child. Sit down and have some tea." Rachel accepted the cup of chamomile tea and wrapped her hands around it for warmth. "Tom offered to marry me today, as a business arrangement to stop the gossip and protect the boys' reputations." Maggie's hands stilled on the silver fork she'd been polishing. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it, but, Maggie, is it fair to him? Is it right to accept such an offer when I can't promise to love him the way a wife should?" Maggie set down the fork and looked directly at Rachel. "Child, I've been watching Tom Harrison for 8 years. I've seen him build this ranch from nothing, work himself near to death during bad seasons, and carry burdens that would break most men. But I've never seen him as content as he's been these past 2 weeks. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Love comes in many forms, Rachel. There's the lightning strike kind that hits you all at once, and there's the quiet kind that grows over time like a garden. Tom's offering you protection, security, and respect. Those aren't small things. But what about passion? What about romance?" Maggie smiled gently. "Romance is fine for novels, but respect and partnership are what make a marriage last. You've seen passion, I'd guess. How did that work out for you?" Rachel thought about her first marriage, the whirlwind courtship, the intense emotions that had burned bright and fast before settling into something more complicated. Her husband had been a good man, but their relationship had been built on attraction and optimism rather than the deeper foundations of mutual respect and shared values. "I loved my husband," Rachel said slowly, "but we were very young when we married. We didn't really know each other, not the way you know someone when you've seen them at their worst, and they've seen you at yours. And Tom has seen you at your worst," Maggie pointed out, "hungry, desperate, with nothing but pride and determination keeping you going. And you've seen him dealing with men like Wade Thornton, making difficult decisions, caring for people who depend on him. That's not a bad foundation for a marriage." Rachel sipped her tea, thinking about the man who had found her family at their lowest point and offered them not just charity but dignity. She thought about the way he talked to her sons, with patience and genuine interest in their thoughts and dreams. She thought about the respect he showed her opinions, the way he made her feel like a partner rather than a dependent. "Would it be wrong to say yes when I'm not in love with him?" she asked. "Would it be wrong to say no when he's offering you and those boys everything you need to build a good life?" Maggie countered. "Child, marriage is work no matter how it starts. The question is whether you're willing to do that work with Tom Harrison." The next morning, Rachel found Tom in the barn, checking on a mare that was expecting her first, foal. He looked up when she entered, his eyes questioning but patient. "I've been thinking about your offer," Rachel said without preamble. Tom set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "If we did this," Rachel continued, "it would have to be a real marriage in the eyes of the law and the community. I won't have people whispering that it's just a sham to stop gossip." "Agreed. And I need time to learn to be a wife to you, not just a housekeeper who shares your name. I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve, but I can promise to try." Tom stepped closer, his eyes serious. "Rachel, I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for partnership. Someone to share the burden of running this place, someone to help me raise those boys into good men, someone to grow old with. If love comes along the way, that's a gift. If it doesn't, we'll still have built something worthwhile together." Rachel looked at this man, who was offering her everything she'd lost and more: security for her children, respect in the community, a future that stretched beyond mere survival. It might not be the fairy tale romance young girls dreamed of, but it was real and solid and honest. "Then yes," she said quietly, "I'll marry you, Tom Harrison." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long night. He took her hands in his work-roughened ones, holding them gently, as if they were made of spun glass. "We'll announce it at church on Sunday," he said. "Give Prudence Whitmore and her gossips something real to talk about." As they stood together in the barn, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of ranch life, Rachel felt something shift. Inside her chest, it wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might grow into love, given time and tending. Outside, she could hear Lucy and Sam laughing as they helped Henry Rodriguez repair a section of fence. Soon, those boys would have a father as well as a mother, and a name that would protect them from the whispers of small-minded people. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was a good life, and sometimes good was more than enough. The announcement at Cedar Valley Community Church that Sunday morning created exactly the kind of stir Tom had anticipated. As he stood beside Rachel at the front of the congregation, her hand resting lightly on his arm, he could practically feel the collective intake of breath from the assembled worshippers. Lucy and Sam flanked them, scrubbed clean and dressed in their best clothes, which Maggie had somehow managed to procure and alter to fit them perfectly. Pastor William Hartley, a kind man in his 60s with a gift for seeing the best in people, smiled broadly as he made the announcement. "It gives me great pleasure to share that Thomas Harrison and Rachel Martinez have asked me to perform their wedding ceremony 3 weeks from today. The entire community is invited to celebrate this joyous occasion." The buzz of conversation that followed was immediate and intense. Rachel kept her chin high and her expression serene, but Tom could feel the slight tremor in her hand where it rested on his sleeve. He covered her hand with his own, offering what comfort he could through the simple gesture. Mrs. Prudence Whitmore looked as if she'd swallowed something particularly unpalatable. Her tight smile and the way she clutched her hymnal suggested she was struggling to reconcile her previous concerns with this perfectly respectable development. Behind her, several other women leaned together, whispering with the intensity of scholars debating scripture, but not all the reactions were negative. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had delivered half the babies in Cedar Valley, approached them after the service with genuine warmth. "Rachel, my dear, what wonderful news. Tom, Harrison is one of the finest men in this valley, and those boys of yours are lucky to have him as a father." Henry Rodriguez and his wife Maria were among the first to offer congratulations, followed by the Coleman family from the train station and several of Tom's neighboring ranches. The support from these respected members of the community went a long way toward establishing the legitimacy of the match in the eyes of those who might have been inclined to gossip. As they walked back to the ranch that afternoon, Lucy skipped along beside them, his excitement barely contained. "Does this mean Mr. Tom is going to be our new papa?" "If you'd like him to be," Rachel replied carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Sam, who had been unusually quiet during the morning's proceedings, finally spoke up. "Will he teach us to ride horses for real, not just sitting on them while he holds the reins?" Tom chuckled. "Once you're married to your mama, I'll teach you everything I know about horses, cattle, and running a ranch. If you want to learn, that is." "Can we call you Papa?" Lucy asked shyly. The question hit Tom harder than he'd expected. These two boys, who had come into his life by pure chance, were offering him the title he'd never thought he'd hear. His throat tightened with emotion as he knelt down to bring himself to their eye level. "I'd be honored if you called me Papa," he said quietly, "but you take all the time you need to decide if that feels right to you." Sam stepped forward and wrapped his thin arms around Tom's neck. "It feels right," he said simply. "You're not like our first papa, but you're good to us and to Mama." The acceptance in the child's voice, the matter-of-fact way he acknowledged both the loss of his biological father and the gain of this new protector, moved Tom profoundly. He hugged both boys, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Maggie threw herself into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of a general organizing a campaign. The ceremony would be held at the church, followed by a reception at the ranch. She commandeered the kitchen, enlisting the help of neighboring women to prepare enough food for what seemed like half the county. "This wedding is going to show everyone exactly what kind of people Tom Harrison and Rachel Martinez are," Maggie declared, as she supervised the construction of what appeared to be enough cake batter to feed a small army. "There'll be no skimping, no cutting corners. This is going to be a celebration worthy of the name." Rachel found herself caught up in preparations she'd never imagined. Her first wedding had been a simple affair at the Justice of the Peace, with only her parents and her husband's brother as witnesses. This time, it seemed the entire community wanted to participate. Women she barely knew appeared at the ranch, with offers of help. Some brought fabric for curtains, others contributed family recipes for the reception feast. Mrs. Coleman from the train station arrived with a beautiful lace tablecloth that had been in her family for generations, insisting that Rachel borrow it for the reception tables. "Every bride deserves something special for her wedding day," she said warmly, "and Lord knows you've brought enough happiness to that man to deserve all the celebration we can give you." The most unexpected support came from Dr. Patricia Williams, who appeared at the kitchen door one evening with a large dress box under her arm. "I hope you don't mind my presumption," she said to Rachel, "but I have something that might interest you." She opened the box to reveal a wedding dress of ivory silk, elegant in its simplicity, with delicate pearl buttons and long sleeves that would be perfect for the October weather. "Dr. Williams, I can't possibly accept such a gift," Rachel protested, even as her fingers reached out to touch the beautiful fabric. "It was my daughter's dress," the doctor explained. "She married a doctor in San Francisco and moved away. The dress has been sitting in my closet for 5 years, and it would make Me happy to see it worn by someone who would appreciate it. The dress fit Rachel perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not the desperate woman who had arrived at the train station a month ago, but someone who belonged in this community, someone worthy of the respect and love being offered to her. As the wedding day approached, Tom found himself dealing with his own set of preparations and emotions. He'd ordered a new suit from the tailor in Cheyenne, had the house painted inside and out, and spent considerable time and money ensuring that the ranch looked its absolute best for the celebration. But beyond the physical preparations, he found himself examining his own feelings about the upcoming marriage. What had started as a practical solution to protect Rachel's reputation had evolved into something more complex. He genuinely cared for her, enjoyed her company, and found himself looking forward to the prospect of building a life together. The night before the wedding, he sat on the front porch with Henry Rodriguez, sharing a bottle of whiskey and contemplating the changes tomorrow would bring. "You nervous, boss?" Henry asked, refilling their glasses. "Terrified," Tom admitted with a rueful laugh. "I've run cattle drives, fought off rustlers, and survived 3 of the worst winters in Wyoming history. But the thought of standing up in front of the whole town tomorrow and promising to be a good husband has me scared as a schoolboy." "Mrs. Rachel, she's a good woman," Henry observed. "Those boys, they're good boys. You're getting yourself a real family, Mr. Tom. I know, that's what scares me. I don't want to let them down." Henry studied his employer's profile in the lamplight. "You won't. You're not the kind of man who lets people down when they're counting on you." Inside the house, Rachel was having her own moment of pre-wedding nerves. She sat at the kitchen table with Maggie, attempting to hem a small tear in Lucy's good shirt, while her hands shook with anxiety. "What if I'm making a mistake?" she asked suddenly. "What if I can't be the wife Tom deserves? What if the boys grow up resenting me for marrying someone they barely know?" Maggie reached across the table and stilled Rachel's trembling hands. "Child, you're not marrying a stranger. You've been living under the same roof for a month, working together, raising those boys together. You've seen Tom at his best and his worst, and he's seen the same of you. That's more than a lot of couples have when they say their vows." "But what about love, Maggie? Shouldn't I be madly in love with the man I'm marrying?" "Love isn't always lightning and thunderclaps," Maggie said gently. "Sometimes it's the steady warmth of a good fire on a cold night. Sometimes it's knowing that someone will always be there when you need them. You and Tom have something solid to build on. The rest will come." The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of brilliant blue sky that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Rachel woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and terror. Through her bedroom window, she could see Tom in the distance, walking among the cattle with Scout at his heels, going through his normal morning routine as if this day were no different from any other. The sight of him, solid and dependable, even in the face of such a momentous change, calmed her nerves somewhat. Whatever else happened, she was marrying a man she could count on. The morning passed in a blur of final preparations. Maggie braided flowers into Rachel's hair, helped her into the borrowed wedding dress, and fussed over every detail until Rachel looked like something from a fairy tale. The boys, scrubbed and dressed in their finest clothes, could barely contain their excitement. "Mama, you look like a princess," Sam declared with 7-year-old solemnity. "Papa Tom is going to think you're the most beautiful lady in the whole world," Lucy added, and Rachel's heart clenched at hearing her son refer to Tom as Papa so naturally. The church was packed to capacity when they arrived. It seemed that everyone in Cedar Valley and the surrounding ranches had turned out for the wedding. Rachel walked down the aisle on Henry Rodriguez's arm, having asked Tom's foreman to give her away since her own father had passed years before. Tom stood at the altar in his new suit, his hair neatly combed and his face serious but warm. When Their eyes met. He smiled, the kind of smile that started in his eyes and spread slowly across his features, transforming his weathered face into something almost handsome. Pastor Hartley performed the ceremony with dignity and warmth, speaking about the foundations of marriage, the importance of partnership, and the blessing of bringing two families together into one. When it came time for the vows, Tom's voice was steady and clear as he promised to love, honor, and protect Rachel and her children for as long as he lived. Rachel's own vows came from the heart, though she had practiced them carefully. She promised to be a faithful wife, a loving mother to any children they might have together, and a true partner in building the life they were creating. When Pastor Hartley pronounced them husband and wife, Tom kissed Rachel with gentle reverence, as if sealing a sacred contract rather than claiming a prize. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and Lucy and Sam pushed forward to hug their new parents. The reception at the ranch was everything Maggie had envisioned and more. Tables groaned under the weight of food prepared by the women of the community. A small band of local musicians provided entertainment, and as the afternoon wore on, couples began dancing on the makeshift floor that had been constructed in the barn. Tom led Rachel in their first dance as husband and wife, guiding her through a simple waltz while their guests looked on with approval. Rachel was acutely aware of how right it felt to be in his arms, how perfectly they moved together despite having never danced before. "No regrets?" Tom murmured as they swayed to the music. "None," Rachel replied, and was surprised to find that she meant it completely. As the evening progressed, the celebration took on a life of its own. Neighbors who had been suspicious of the sudden marriage found themselves charmed by the obvious happiness of the new family. Lucy and Sam raced around with the other children, their laughter carrying across the ranch like music. Dr. Williams pulled Rachel aside during a quiet moment. "I've been watching you today," she said with a knowing smile. "You're glowing like a woman in love." Rachel felt her cheeks warm. "It's just the excitement of the day." "No, my dear, I've seen enough brides to know the difference. You may have married Tom Harrison for practical reasons, but you're falling in love with him. And from the way he's been watching you all day, the feeling is mutual." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Rachel found herself alone with Tom on the front porch of what was now truly their home. The boys had fallen asleep hours ago, exhausted from the excitement, and Maggie had tactfully retired to her own quarters. "Well, Mrs. Harrison," Tom said, testing out her new name, "how does it feel to be married?" "Different than I expected," Rachel admitted. "Better, somehow. More real." Tom nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream. A month ago, I was a lonely bachelor with nothing but cattle and land to show for my life. Now I have a wife and 2 sons and a future I actually want to live." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Finally, Tom spoke again. "Rachel, I want you to know that tonight doesn't have to change anything between us. We can take this as slow as you need. There's no pressure, no expectations beyond what we've already established." Rachel turned to study his profile in the starlight. This man who had married her to protect her reputation was now offering to sacrifice his own needs to ensure her comfort. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, the respect it showed for her autonomy, touched her deeply. "Tom," she said quietly, "I think I'm ready for this marriage to be real in every way. Not because I feel obligated, but because I want it to be." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. He stood and offered her his hand, and together they walked into their house as husband and wife, ready to begin the next chapter of their unexpected love story. Behind them, the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than Tom had known for years. It was the quiet of a home filled with love, a family complete, and a future bright with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. The legend of the millionaire rancher who found a starving mother with twins at the train station was already beginning to take shape in the minds of those who had witnessed their story unfold. But the real story, the one that would be told for generations in Cedar Valley, was just beginning. 5 years had passed since that October morning when Tom Harrison first found Rachel and her twins at the Cedar Valley train station, and the transformation of both the family and the ranch had become the stuff of local legend. What had begun as an act of compassion had blossomed into something far more profound than anyone could have predicted. The main house at Sunset Creek Ranch now echoed with the sounds of a thriving family. Lucy and Sam, now 12 years old, had grown tall and strong under Tom's guidance, their faces bronzed by mountain sun and their hands calloused from honest work. They moved through their daily chores with the easy competence of boys who had been raised to understand that privilege came with responsibility. Rachel had bloomed as well, though the changes in her were perhaps more subtle. The desperate woman who had clutched her children at the train station had evolved into someone who carried herself with quiet confidence. Her hands, once soft from city living, now bore the honest marks of ranch work. More importantly, her eyes held a contentment that spoke of someone who had found her place in the world. The marriage that had begun as a practical arrangement had deepened into something neither Tom nor Rachel had dared to hope for. They had learned each other's rhythms, supported each other through difficult seasons, and built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. If it wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks, it was something perhaps more valuable, a love built on solid ground that could weather any storm. The community of Cedar Valley had long since embraced the Harrison family as their own. Mrs. Prudence Whitmore, who had once questioned the propriety of their arrangement, now pointed to them as an example of how good Christian values could transform lives. The boys attended school with the children of neighboring ranches, and Rachel had become an integral part of the Women's Church Auxiliary, her practical skills and generous heart making her a valued member of the community. But it was on a crisp morning in late October, exactly 5 years after their wedding, that the true measure of what they had built together would be tested. Rachel was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the family and the ranch hands, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the window she could see 3 riders coming up the main road to the house, their pace urgent enough to suggest trouble. Tom emerged from the barn to meet them, and even from a distance Rachel could see the tension in his posture as he recognized the visitors. The lead rider was Sheriff Marcus Webb from Cheyenne, a man Rachel had met only once before. Behind him rode 2 men she didn't recognize, their official bearing and serious expressions suggesting they were law enforcement of some kind. Her heart clenched with the familiar anxiety of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors often brought unwelcome news. Lucy and Sam, sensing their mother's tension, moved closer to the window to watch the conversation unfolding in the yard. Tom's body language remained calm and controlled, but Rachel knew him well enough to see the subtle signs of strain in the set of his shoulders. After what seemed like an eternity, Tom shook hands with the 3 men and watched them ride away. He stood in the yard for a long moment, his hat in his hands, before slowly making his way back to the house. Rachel met him at the kitchen door, her eyes full of questions. "What did they want?" she asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Tom sat heavily at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older than his years. They were looking for information about a man named William Garrett. Apparently, he's wanted for questioning, in connection with some cattle rustling operations that have been plaguing ranches throughout Wyoming and Colorado. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. William Garrett had been her first husband's. name the father of her twins, but William Martinez had died in a construction accident in Denver 5 years ago. Surely there was some mistake. Tom, she said carefully, why would they think you might know anything about this William Garrett? Tom looked up at her, his eyes filled with a compassion that somehow made her fear even worse. Rachel, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have told you years ago. With trembling legs, Rachel sank into the chair across from him. Lucy and Sam, sensing the gravity of the moment, moved closer to their mother, their young faces worried. The sheriff brought some documents with him, Tom continued gently. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, employment records. Rachel, your husband didn't die in a construction accident in Denver. The words hit her like a physical blow. What are you saying? William Garrett staged his own death to escape, mounting gambling debts and some very dangerous people who were looking for him. He's been operating under various aliases throughout the West, rustling cattle and running confidence games. The construction accident was elaborate fiction designed to give him a clean slate. Rachel stared at him, her mind struggling to process this information. The man she had mourned, the father whose death had driven her family into poverty and desperation, had abandoned them deliberately. He had chosen to let them believe he was dead, rather than face his responsibilities. The boys, she whispered, looking at Lucy and Sam with anguish. They grieved for him. They've been carrying the pain of losing their father, and all this time he's been alive and free while we struggled to survive. Tom reached across the table and took her hands in his. I know this is devastating news, but Rachel, there's more you need to know. The sheriff believes Garrett might try to contact you or the boys. He's running out of places to hide, and family connections are often the last resort for men like him. The implications of this statement sent ice through Rachel's veins. You think he might come here? It's possible. Sheriff Webb wanted to warn us to be on the lookout. Garrett has become increasingly desperate, and desperate men do unpredictable things. Sam, who had been listening with the intensity only children possess when adults think they're not paying attention, spoke up. Mama, are you saying our real Papa isn't dead, that he left us on purpose? The pain in her son's voice broke Rachel's heart. She pulled both boys into her arms, holding them close, while she struggled to find words that could explain the unexplainable. Sometimes, sweetheart, people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love and protect. Your father made some very bad choices, and instead of facing the consequences, he ran away and let us believe he was dead. But Papa Tom is our real papa now, Lucy said, with the fierce loyalty of a child who had found security and wasn't willing to let anyone threaten it. He didn't leave us. He chose us. Tom's eyes filled with tears at the boy's words. He had legally adopted both children after his marriage to Rachel, giving them his name and all the protections that came with it. But hearing Lucy affirm that bond in the face of this revelation touched him deeply. That's right, son, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. Nothing that happened before we became a family changes what we are now. You boys are my sons in every way that matters, and this ranch is your home. Over the following weeks, the family tried to return to their normal routines, but the shadow of William Garrett's potential return hung over them like a storm cloud. Tom quietly increased security around the ranch, asking Henry Rodriguez to keep extra vigilance during his rounds, and instructing the ranch hands to report any strangers they might encounter. Rachel found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, constantly checking on the boys, and lying awake at night wondering if today would be the day her past caught up with her present. The happiness and security she had built seemed suddenly fragile, threatened by forces beyond her control. It was on a cold November evening, 3 weeks after the sheriff's visit, that William Garrett finally appeared. Rachel was putting the boys to bed when she heard Scout barking with unusual intensity. The dog's alarm was followed by a sharp knock at the front door. Tom, who had been reading in the living room, moved to answer it with the careful caution of a man who had been expecting unwelcome visitors. Rachel heard voices, one unfamiliar but somehow triggering a deep recognition that made her blood run cold. She quickly settled the boys in their room with instructions to stay put, no matter what they heard, then made her way downstairs. Standing in their living room, looking older and more weathered than she remembered, was the man she had mourned for 5 years. William Garrett had the lean, hungry look of someone who had been living rough, and his eyes held a desperation that made her instinctively step closer to Tom. "Hello, Rachel," William said, his voice carrying echoes of the charm that had once attracted her. "You're looking well. Marriage to a rich rancher obviously agrees with you." "What do you want, William?" Rachel asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want to see my boys. I want to spend some time with my family. Is that so unreasonable?" Tom stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. "You gave up any rights to this family when you staged your own death and abandoned them. The boys think you're dead, and as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what you are." William's eyes narrowed as he took in Tom's protective stance. "And who are you to tell me about my own children? Some rich fool who bought himself a ready-made family? I'm the man who found them starving at a train station because their father was too much of a coward to face his responsibilities," Tom replied, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm the man who's fed them, clothed them, and loved them for 5 years, while you were playing outlaw." "They're my sons," William said, his desperation beginning to show. "My blood. You can't just take them away from me." "You took yourself away from them," Rachel said, finding her voice and her strength. "You let them grieve for you. You let them go hungry rather than be a man and face what you'd done. You have no claim on them anymore, William. None at all." The conversation might have continued, but it was interrupted by the sound of small feet on the stairs. Despite Rachel's instructions, Lucy and Sam had crept down to see what was happening. They stood in the doorway, staring at the stranger in their living room with confusion and growing alarm. William's face lit up with what might have been genuine emotion. "Lucy! Sam! My God, look how you've grown! Do you remember your papa?" The boys looked at this stranger who claimed to be their father, then at Tom, then back at William. Sam was the first to speak, his voice small but clear. "Our papa is dead. Papa Tom told us the truth about what happened. You're not our papa anymore." The rejection hit William like a physical blow. He had clearly expected a different reception, perhaps imagined that his children would welcome him back with joy and forgiveness. Instead, he faced 2 boys who had processed the truth about his abandonment and chosen the man who had actually cared for them. "Boys, I know this is confusing," William said, his voice taking on a wheedling quality that made Rachel's skin crawl. "But I'm your real father. I can explain everything, the accident, the reasons I had to stay away. We can be a family again." "We already are a family," Lucy said with startling maturity. "We don't need you." The simple honesty of the child's words seemed to break something in William. His face hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a threat that made Tom tense for action. "This isn't over, Rachel. Those are my boys, and I have rights. Legal rights that no adoption papers can erase. I'll be back, and next time I won't be asking permission." He turned and walked out of the house, leaving behind a family, shaken but not broken. Tom immediately moved to secure the doors and windows, while Rachel gathered the boys close, her heart pounding with fear and anger. The next morning brought Sheriff Webb and 2 federal marshals who had been tracking William Garrett for months. They arrived to find him camped in the hills above the ranch, apparently planning some kind of action against the family. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Garrett, faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes and no allies to support him, surrendered without violence. As they led him away in shackles, he looked back at the ranch house one last time. Standing, On the front porch, surrounded by the family he had abandoned and the life he had thrown away, was everything he could have had if he had chosen differently. "I'm sorry," he called out, though whether he was speaking to Rachel, the boys, or himself was unclear. "I'm sorry for all of it." Rachel watched the man who had once been her husband disappear down the road, feeling a complex mixture of sadness, relief, and closure. Tom's arm around her shoulders was warm and reassuring, a reminder of the solid foundation they had built together. "Is it really over?" she asked. "It's over," Tom confirmed. "He'll be in prison for a long time. You and the boys are safe." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table sharing the meal that had become a daily celebration of their togetherness, Sam looked up at Tom with serious eyes. "Papa Tom, are you going to stay with us forever, even now that our other father—" "I came back?" Tom reached across the table and ruffled the boy's hair. "Son, I'm not going anywhere. This is my family, this is my home, and nothing in this world could make me leave you." Lucy grinned and returned to his food, the security of Tom's promise settling over him like a warm blanket. Beside him, his brother Sam nodded with satisfaction, and their mother smiled with the contentment of a woman who had found her place in the world. Years later, when the story of Tom Harrison and Rachel Martinez was told throughout Wyoming and beyond, people would focus on different aspects of the tale. Some emphasized the romance of it, the way practical necessity had blossomed into deep love. Others talked about the redemption, how broken people had found healing in each other's arms. But for those who knew the family personally, the real miracle wasn't in the dramatic moments of rescue or confrontation. It was in the quiet daily choices they made to love and support each other, to build something lasting from the broken pieces of their individual lives. Rachel often stood on the front porch of their home in the evenings, watching Tom work with the boys in the corrals, teaching them the skills they would need to run the ranch someday. In those moments, she marveled at the journey that had brought them together, the random chance that had led a desperate mother and her children to exactly the right place, at exactly the right time. The legend grew with each telling, but the truth was simpler and more profound than any story. Sometimes love isn't a lightning strike. Sometimes it's the steady accumulation of small kindnesses, shared work, and mutual respect. Sometimes the greatest romances are built not on passion, but on the daily choice to care for each other, to show up when life gets difficult, and to create a home where everyone belongs. Tom Harrison had indeed found a starving mother with twins at a train station. But what he had really discovered was that the missing piece of his own life had been waiting for him in the most unexpected place. And Rachel Martinez had found more than security and safety. She had found a partner who valued her strength, a man who saw her worth, and a love that grew stronger with each passing season. Their story became legend because it proved that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations come from the most ordinary acts of human decency. In a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, their tale offered hope that kindness still mattered, that families could be chosen as well as born, and that love had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.